Hello again, everyone. It's Adam Capek here again with another one of our talks. And this is potentially the talk that I'd like to think will answer our overall question, or at least come some way to answering our overall question of why are we all stuck indoors. This is the one where I want to try and tackle this big question of what's the big deal about coronavirus? Why is it that this particular virus at this particular time seems to have brought the world to a halt? Now, there are lots of questions rumbling around. There are lots of statements, some of them true, some of them false. There's a huge amount on social media. There's a huge amount in the printed press. There's a huge amount on television. Let's try and deal, first of all, with some of the myths about coronavirus. So here are some statements that are not true about coronavirus. First of all, we are not all going to get sick. Healthy people can get coronavirus. Most of the healthy people that get coronavirus will be absolutely fine, however. To say there is nothing we can do if you get coronavirus would be utterly untrue. There's a huge amount of stuff we can do. And to say that the health service cannot cope with the coronavirus crisis would also be untrue. There's an incredible amount of background work going on to make sure that whatever challenges we come up with in the health service, we can cope with them. And also to say that this must be someone's fault. It would be lovely to be able to blame someone, to blame an individual, whether that's someone in a position of power or whether it's someone closer to the ground. Unfortunately, we can't say this is someone's fault. This is just something we're all having to deal with. So there we go. We've tackled some of the myths to start with. Now let's say, what is a virus? So coronavirus is a virus. A virus is an infectious particle. What I would say, first of all, this isn't a higher biology lesson, so I'm not going to go on about this. Viruses are a bit rubbish, if I'm honest. What do I mean by that? Well, inside a virus, there's a capsule, which is essentially encapsulating some genetic material. But there's not very much other than that. So a virus cannot actually live, it cannot reproduce, it cannot replicate on its own. It needs to invade another cell, it needs to invade a host cell, for example, one of our cells or an animal cell, to be able to actually exist. So a virus is pretty useless on its own. And that's part of the reason why viruses can be tackled by measures like just washing your hands. You can get rid of them quite simply. They're not great at surviving. But once they get inside another cell, a host cell, that's when they're able to replicate, they're able to divide, and they're able to cause trouble. So that's what a virus is. It's actually something that on its own is pretty rubbish, but it's good at invading other beings, other cells, and then it can cause problems. Now, what happens when we're infected by a virus? So this is what you might imagine the inside of one of your blood vessels looks like. These disc-like things, they look a bit like flying saucers. That's your red cells. So the red cells are what carry the oxygen around the body. And these things look a bit like snowballs, really. They are your white cells, and the white cells are responsible for your immune responses. They're responsible for fighting off anything that's deemed to be foreign inside your body, so something that's not part of you. Now, occasionally, these immune responses, the white cells, they can go out of control for whatever reason, and that can cause what we call autoimmune problems, where the body starts attacking itself. But for the most part, they're incredibly useful, and their job is fighting against stuff that our body recognizes as being foreign. So when we get infected by a virus, these guys kick into action. And what actually happens? Well, first of all, they're able to fight off and attack the virus. Now, here's a picture of, clearly that's not what it looks like inside the lungs, but ultimately, if we're thinking about coronavirus, which can affect people's lungs, there is this kind of battle going on between the white cells, between the immune system, and between that virus. And generally, the immune system is fantastic at doing its job. It can generally fight off all of these problems, whether that be a virus, whether it be a bacteria. And so that's why we don't get sick all the time. Now, sometimes that immune response can make us feel unwell. So why do we get a fever? Why do we get a temperature? Why can we be quite shivery when we've got an infection? It's sometimes a product of that immune system's fight going on. But ultimately, the immune system almost always wins. That's why we're not getting sick from bugs in the environment all of the time. What else happens is that when the immune system, when those white cells have fought off a bug, a virus or a bacteria, they then create a memory of it. So they create antibodies which then circulate around the system. They remember this thing, so the next time they have to fight against the same thing, the immune response is even better. Now that's the basis on which vaccines work. So why do we get vaccines for certain conditions? The vaccine is essentially a dead copy of whatever that infectious disease is. So whether it be polio or typhoid or anything like that, or tetanus, it's a dead copy of that our immune system can recognize, create a memory. So if we ever come up against that disease for real, it's able to fight it off straight away. It's already got a memory of it. And there's this concept that you may have seen in the press called herd immunity. Now, what do we mean by herd immunity? Let's take this picture, for example. We've got, well, here we go. This is our coronavirus up there, or it's any other kind of virus you fancy. Now, imagine that we are this red cow down here. Now, all of the red cows are ones that don't have any immunity. They don't have any memory in their immune system of this particular bug. So they can all be susceptible to this bug. Now, the green cows, they do have some memory of it. So they are not able to catch the bug. Perhaps they've been vaccinated. Perhaps they've already been infected with it in the past and they've fought it off. Now, if we picture all these cows in this field, we are this red cow down here, and this bug is going to try to get to us. Clearly, it's got a long way to go to get through this field. But because there's no immunity in all of these red cows, the bug can just pass from cow to 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 cow, and eventually get to us, and it can infect us. So when there's no herd immunity, it's easy for a bug to pass from person to person to person to person, and ultimately it can infect everyone. Now, what happens if there is herd immunity? So let's change that picture. So we've got the same bug. We are still susceptible down in the corner there. There's a couple of our other friends who are also susceptible. They don't have any memory of this bug. They've not been infected by it or vaccinated against it. But all the other cows in the field, they do have a memory. They are immune to this bug. So if this bug tries to infect someone, it can't actually reach us because it would have to fight through the barrier, through the herd immunity of all of these other cows, or in our case, all these other people who are immune to it. The bug cannot pass from cow to cow to cow to cow, so it cannot get to us. So even if in our population there are some people who are susceptible to bugs, if the majority of the population is immune, then actually that ultimately keeps everyone safe. This is a really important concept in terms of thinking about coronavirus. But why is coronavirus such a problem? Well, the first thing we need to say is that coronaviruses have been out there for years and years and years. They've been causing colds that we've been dealing with for years and years. But this one, the one we're specifically talking about, is coronavirus disease 2019, or COVID-19. Now, the reason why it's the 2019 version is because it was initially recognized just at the end of 2019. And this is one that we are having a problem with. So it's not every coronavirus that has ever existed. It's specifically COVID-19 that is causing the trouble. And why is it causing the trouble? Well, ultimately, it is one of the viruses that can cause the common cold. Now, normally we just get over a common cold without any problems, but we do know that it's easy to catch a common cold from one person to another. So whether that's caused by rhinovirus or RSV or parainfluenza or one of the other coronaviruses, it's easy for a cold to pass from person to person. So with this new COVID-19, the coronavirus 2019 version, we know it's easy to pass it from person to person. However, just like a normal cold, it's easy to stop it passing from person to person. Number one, if we don't come into contact with people who already have it. So that's part of the reason for this social distancing, the social isolation. Number two, if we wash our hands, because we know it can live on surfaces and then live on our hands. And number three, if we just take some simple precautions, like not sneezing on people, if we feel the need to cough and sneeze. Let's look at where it started. Now, this COVID-19 was first recognized in Wuhan province in China. Now, that is a very long way away from the United Kingdom. If this had emerged in, say, 1850, it really wouldn't have made a difference to us in the United Kingdom. And the reason why I say that is because travel was so different. It would have taken years and years and years and years, realistically, for the bug to get from person to person to person to person to jump to us in the United Kingdom. But with the modern world as it is, people flying all around the world, people traveling all the time, it's much easier for a bug to jump right the way across the planet. So why has this affected the whole planet and not just this small region in China? It's because of the way that the modern world is set up. So again, why have we reduced unnecessary flying? Why are we not able to go on our trips to wherever we want to go to? Why are we not even really able to get into the car to go to the other side of the country at the moment? It's to reduce this transmission from place to place, which is a particular problem of the modern world. And also, because coronavirus disease 2019 is new to us, is something that humans haven't experienced before, we have no immune memory of it. So we don't have any innate immune response against it. So when someone comes up against it, we're in this position of being in the field of the red cows, all of these cows who are susceptible, and it can go from person to person to person. We're not in that same situation where most of the field of cows were green and they were immune. So even if there were a few people that could still catch the disease, they'd probably never come into contact with it. So that lack of having seen it before, that lack of it being a problem in humans before, is the other thing that's really driving a worldwide problem here. And that's why the governments are talking about this idea of herd immunity. That's why there are huge efforts going on to try and create a vaccine against this so that the whole population can become immune to it. But for the time being, we need to protect ourselves as far as possible so we don't come into contact with any of the other red cows, the ones that are susceptible. There we go. That's what it would look like as this coronavirus now transmits around the world from susceptible cow to ultimately get to our doorstep. So why is coronavirus such a problem? Why is this just not like all of the other colds that we know about? Well, first of all, the immune system's fight against it, because it's not recognized it before, has to be incredibly strong and powerful. And that can make you feel really lousy. This is not the case for everyone. Clearly, some people will probably get it and never know they even had it. But for a lot of people, they are feeling quite tired, quite shivery, quite feverish. They might have a really high temperature. They might have a sore throat or a cough. Now, that is the immune system fighting against something that it's never seen before, and it's having to work really hard. And why do I take a picture of the lungs? Well, the main place that the coronavirus seems to really cause trouble is in the lungs. And ultimately, when people become unwell with it, and I stress this is certainly not the case for everyone, but when people do become unwell with it, it tends to go for their lungs. It goes for their breathing. They find it hard to breathe. They find it hard to get enough oxygen in. And that's why we're having to put people onto ventilators, onto breathing machines, to be able to help drive extra oxygen into their system. Now, as that's happening, it also can cause problems in some of the other body systems. So it can cause problems in the heart. It can essentially infect some of the heart muscle, which makes the heart not pump as well. It can affect the kidneys. I cannot stress strongly enough how this is only happening to a small proportion of people who get coronavirus. Most of us, thankfully, are absolutely fine, but it is certainly a potential serious problem, and particularly for those who are already vulnerable, who have an immune system that isn't functioning completely normally. So that's why there's an extra, say, 1 million people in the country who have been told to take even extra precautions and not even go out of their house at all for the time being, not even go for their daily exercise or take the dog for a walk, and really protect themselves as far as they possibly can, because they're seen to be at particularly high risk if they were to come into contact with coronavirus. So let's go back to our myths and let's tackle them head on now. So our myth number one was we're all going to get sick. Now that is absolutely not the case. Some people are going to get sick, and we are already seeing that. And as I speak, our Prime Minister is currently unwell with it. And that just proves that this does not distinguish between the haves and the have-nots. This is something that anyone can get, but most people will be absolutely fine. To say that healthy people can't get the coronavirus, well, that's also untrue. We do know that some healthy people have caught the coronavirus, but most of them have been absolutely fine. They've maybe not felt very well for a bit. They've maybe felt like they've got a bad cold or the flu, but they have ultimately fought it off. And again, I want to stress that to you all. And we particularly know that young people, so those less than 20, maybe less than 30, are even more unlikely to get a serious case of coronavirus. Remember that all the reporting of these things is based around extremes. So people want to read about extremes. So in the rare instance that someone young does catch coronavirus and becomes unwell, that's hitting the headlines. What isn't hitting the headlines is all of the thousands of young people getting coronavirus who are absolutely fine. I really cannot stress that strongly enough to you to give some reassurance. There is nothing we can do if you get coronavirus. That is a complete myth. There is a huge amount we can do. I've described some of those things we can do. We can give extra oxygen. We can put people on ventilators. If it attacks the kidneys, we can support the kidneys. If it attacks the heart, we can support the heart until the body recovers. So there is a huge amount we can do if someone does catch coronavirus. But clearly, some people are becoming very unwell and they are needing a huge amount of support. So with that comes this other myth. The health service cannot cope. Again, a complete myth. For several months, huge amounts of work has been going in to make sure that the health service will cope, to make sure there's increased capacity, more ventilators around, more staff around, more ability to cope, but it will be stretched. There is undoubtedly strain on the health service, and that's why even for those of us who are lucky enough to be healthy and potentially at less risk of serious problems with coronavirus, it's vitally important we don't put extra strain on the health service, either by passing on coronavirus to other vulnerable people or simply by doing activities that are risky. So rather than going mountain biking down a crazy trail where you might break your leg and need to go into the hospital for a reason completely apart from coronavirus, let's just be sensible, take precautions, and not put any extra strain on the health service. And finally, this must be someone's fault. Well, the world doesn't work like that, does it? This isn't someone's fault. This isn't an individual's fault. But in saying that, that means we all have the responsibility to make it better and make the system work. So why have I put a picture of the World Cup, the Football World Cup trophy here? I think we need to think of coronavirus a little bit like someone going into the World Cup final. You know, when the teams are interviewed before the match, say they're coming up against the great Brazil team who are the strong favourites, say we're coming up against them. What will the coaches say? What will the players say before that match? The one thing they won't say is we are afraid of them. They will say, though, we respect them. And we need to treat coronavirus a bit like that opposition that we respect. We will take sensible precautions and we will realise the dangers that it does pose. But we should not be afraid of it because we can control it. So I really hope that gives some explanation of all of the reasons why there are so many changes in our lives at the moment. I hope it does give you some reassurance that we're not all going to get sick here. We're not likely to live in a disaster zone. But we all have that responsibility to look after each other for the time being. So on that, I hope that you're keeping well. I hope your families are all keeping well. And I hope to be in touch with you soon. Thank you very much. Cheers.